Hello, welcome to Waypoint Survival. Today we're here with Dwayne Newton, and he's going to share some great survival stories and some lessons that he learned from his 22 years of experience living in Alaska. So stay tuned. Well, Dwayne, it's good to be here with you. I appreciate you inviting me over to your house, and looking forward to hearing some of the stories, some of your adventures. And you've had some very interesting things happen to you, haven't you?
Yes, sure have. James, thanks for coming over. I really appreciate you coming over, and we'll try to share some good stories with you today.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing the story about this grizzly bear back here. So
we'll get to that here in a little bit. That was real exciting, to say the least.
I imagine. All right, so yeah, so go ahead, start. Tell us what.
All right,
where do you want to start?
We have at least 3 or 4. Maybe we'll share 4 stories with you, and I'll try not to go into a lot of detail.
Okay,
but
sure.
We'll just hit the high points. But this was a dog sledding incident that happened. Had a friend up there that had dogs and sleds, and he asked me if I would like to go dog sledding with him, and I said, sure, I'd love to. So we went to his house, hooked up the dogs and the sleds, and he was on one, I was on the other, and we took off across the tundra, came to the Chena River, the east of Fairbanks, and took off up the river. Well, it's in the spring, and things were starting to break up a little bit, and we got going up the river, and of course it was all frozen over at that point, but we got up the ways, and I saw a break in the river, and my friend was behind me, and I said, hey, the river's open up here. Should I proceed? Oh yeah. He said, the dogs will take you right over it. And I said, okay. Well, I got closer to the break in the river, and I realized it was quite wide. So I hollered back at him one more time. He said, keep going. So the dogs took me right in the river. It was 20 below that afternoon, and so I sunk down to a layer of ice, which was about water up to my waist. And you're talking about cold. That woke me up. And so I'm in the water, struggling, trying to get up on the ice, and the dogs had jumped up on the ice, and they were pulling me, and I finally got up to it kept breaking off. I finally got on the ice and stood up, and I'm soaking wet from my waist to my feet. And so I had bunny boots on, and I had those brown poly P's, we call them. They're military long underwear. I had those on, so I stood up and on the ice, took my bunny boots off, wrung my socks out, and put my feet back in those wet boots. And my friend looked at me and he said, what do we do? You want to go back home? You're soaked. And I said, no, I'd like to keep sledding. He said, well, how? I said, I've got these bunny boots on. I said, I've never proven them. They tell you if you get them wet, even at 40, 50 below, your feet will stay warm as long as you're moving. So I said, I want to try these out. He said, all right. So we continued to sled for another 2 hours before we went back to where I could get warm. The neat thing is, when I got home, I took my jeans off, which were over my poly P's. Mm-hmm. They were frozen stiff. In fact, I had to sit down. They pulled them off and stood them up in the living room floor. That's how cold it was. But the ironic thing is, my feet, even though they were soaking wet, mm-hmm. they were warm. The poly P's had wicked out the water mm-hmm. for my body heat, and my legs were warm.
Yeah.
And so on that trip, you'd have to say I had the right gear to get me through and get me back home.
Right. So poly P's would be polypropylene.
Yep.
The brown heavy duty winter gear, and then the bunny boots. I've also heard those called Mickey boots.
Yeah.
I think they come in black and white.
Yes.
And yeah.
I'm gonna tell you, they really work.
Sounds like it. So your jeans were soaked and frozen stiff. But in that 2 hours, your body heat had pushed the water mm-hmm. out through that wicking polypropylene had pulled the water off of your body and pushed it to the outer layer to the jeans.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. That's great.
Amazing.
Wow. So that was a pretty exciting story. And so you also have a really great story that you told me previously about a moose hunt, and mm-hmm. this was a big moose.
Yes, sir. It was very.
Tell us about that one.
Well, western Alaska, not too far from the Arctic Ocean, some great hunting in there for moose, some large bulls. And a friend of mine flew us out on a ridge, on a mountain ridge, and dropped us off with a Super Cub. And he dropped me off and went back to the airport there and picked up another young man to come out, and he was going to hunt with me, and he did. But when we flew out, he dropped me off and said, put the tent up, I'll have the other guy out here in a little while. And it was starting to get dark, and when you drop off out there, I mean, it's 80 miles from nowhere. I mean, there's nothing out there but wildlife. We had no communication, but when he dropped off my friend, the pilot said, you guys got food? I said, well, not really. We got a few bottles of water and some peanuts and some M&Ms. That's about it. He goes, don't worry about it. He said, I'll fly back over here tomorrow on my way through and drop off some food for you. I said, okay, no problem. So anyway, it was about dark then. He flew away. That was on a Wednesday evening. Thursday, we waited all day. He never came back. We had no communication to know what had happened. So on Friday, we got up and we looked down the mountain towards the river, and there were two huge moose down there. These moose had been fighting, and we could hear them down there clanging their antlers together, and it was just really neat to see it. We were glassing from a distance, and one of them finally took off through the alder bushes and ran away. But the other one, we watched it a little bit. It moved around in the alders and looked like it laid down. So I told my friend, I said, look, this is a good opportunity because the wind was blowing the right direction. He wouldn't wind us. Let's just sneak up on it. And so that's exactly what we did. We walked quite a distance through the tundra and the alder bushes and got within 30 yards of that moose. And so I stepped out around an alder bush, and this moose is looking at me. And he'd just been fighting, so he heard the brush, and so he's expecting another fight. And immediately goes down with his antlers and starts throwing dirt and brush and stuff just everywhere. I could see it flying, so finally when I stepped out around to where I could actually see the moose, he's looking right at me, those beady eyes. And so I just shot one shot right in the chest area, and he flinched and turned around and took off, and I thought, oh no, I'm going to lose this moose. But he didn't go too far, and I heard him fall. And the ironic thing is, though, that when I tried to chamber a new bullet into my gun, the other one, the casing had jammed in there, and I couldn't get another bullet in there. So my friend, fortunately, he had a gun, and we're able to finish the moose off. And it took 7 hours for me to skin that moose out and quarter it to where we could haul it back up the mountain. It was 3/4 of a mile up to where the plane would land, and 3/4 of a mile each way for us to walk back and forth. And with both of us, it took 12 trips to get all that moose meat and the
How many pounds?
1,900.
1,900 pounds of moose meat.
Yeah.
That's a lot of trips.
Yeah. Here's the ironic thing: we were hungry because we were pretty much out of food. We were thirsty. We were out of bottled water. The only way we could get water was to boil it.
Mm-hmm.
And way down below our campsite was a little stream, and we'd go down there and get water. And I had one of those
jet boil.
Jet boil. I
Okay.
had one of those, and so we would boil our water on that, and then we'd have to wait till it cooled down before we could drink it.
Right.
So coming back up the mountain with all that weight on our back, the blueberries were really on the side of the mountains. We'd just stop and pick blueberries and eat those, and it gave us liquid.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, amazing how much strength it gave us.
Right.
And so anyway, we didn't get it all hauled that day. That was on Friday. Saturday we went down and finished all of it. And so I told my friend, I said, look, we don't know where our pilot is. We don't know when we're going to get out of here. But one thing we do know, we've got meat.
Mm-hmm.
And that very night, we were so weak from all that hauling and not having any food. I took the back straps from the moose and cut them up into little inch blocks. And we went down to a place where there was some woods and some sticks and stuff, and carved some sticks and put that meat on the end and cooked it over a fire down there. And I'm going to tell you, James, it was delicious. And immediately both of us felt strength. you know, after all that time. Finally, that was Saturday. Sunday, nothing. We were wondering, did our pilot crash? We had no way of knowing. My friends wanting us to try to walk out. That's 70 miles up a river.
Okay.
That's probably more like 120 if you stayed on the river. And I said, no, we've got meat. We're going to stay right here. Somebody will eventually find us. And so anyway, we Sunday evening, about dark, we heard a plane coming. Sure enough, in the distance, that was him. And he flew in, and he's immediately, when he landed, he pushed open that side window and threw us sandwiches. he knew we were hungry, because that'd been from Wednesday to Sunday night without hardly anything. So
that's a long time to go. And if you hadn't have gotten a moose, I mean, you have blueberries, and water, but I mean, that's still not a.
And if we hadn't been working so hard,
right.
We wouldn't have been quite so bad, but man, we're burning up a lot of calories.
Oh my! Yeah, what do you suppose the elevation was?
Oh, it was pretty high, and it was just
3/4 of a mile.
It was all up. Yeah, it was all uphill. Okay. One other thing I was going to mention as far as survival on that moose hunting trip, if we would have had a satellite phone, which we talked about later, we could have at least called and found out what was going on. When you're way out there and there's nobody around and you can't communicate with anybody, it leaves you sort of scared. I mean, you don't know what's going to happen.
So the pilot had one?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, he had one, but he had no way to connect with us.
Right.
And anyway, we finally got out of there, and thank God we got the moose, because that probably saved us. And if he had never made it back, we could have probably survived.
For a long time.
We had nice sleeping bags and tent. We could have made some other arrangements probably, but we were in there for the long haul.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, I'm really enjoying this, and really appreciate you sharing your experiences. Now, you had another incident that happened where you and another fellow were on four-wheelers, and you're out in the back country. What were you doing? What were you?
We're actually in the Alaskan range, and we were the rivers up there. Most of them are braided rivers, and tributaries run here and there. And so we were actually grizzly bear hunting, and we'd gone way back up from where there's a pass that goes back up into the mountains. There's glaciers back in there, and we looked. We were up on a mountain across the river, looking on the other side to another mountain, and we saw a grizzly bear over there. So we both looked at each other and said, "All right, let's go get it." So we went down to the river, quite a ways to get down there, and even then, we didn't realize what was happening, but even then the water seemed high in that tributary, but we finally got across with our four-wheelers. And so we got over there and went up into a pass, and sure enough, that grizzly bear was coming right down to us where we wanted to be, and have a good shot. But we kept watching, and a moose, of all things, a big moose, came out into an open area, and the bear saw the moose and took off after the moose, and so we never saw the bear again. So we waited down there quite a while through the afternoon, thinking maybe it would come back down, but it never did. So the bear never showed up, and so we thought, well, we better be getting back to the river and get back to camp, because it was a good ways, to get back there. And so we got back to the main river there, the tributary with water, and sure enough, that glacier had been a little warmer that day. The glacier had been melting quite a bit, and the water was way up from the time we came over previously. And so we went back and forth up and down the river trying to find a shallow spot to get across. And it was getting late, and it was starting to get dark, and I finally told my partner, I said, look, I'm just going to go right here, and if I get across, you come on behind me. If I don't, we'll do something else. I was just getting tired. I was getting impatient. I should have waited. He looked at me and said, if you want to try it, go ahead. Okay, well, here I go. So I got back a little ways, and I hit that water, and I got up about halfway, and it just, the bottom dropped out, and of course it killed the motor. Now I'm in this water just raging down through there, and I knew what was going to happen, and I was trying to keep it straight, so if I hit a rock or a boulder or a log or something, it wouldn't flip me over, but of course it turned sideways, and as soon as I hit the rock, it flipped me over into the water. And that water was fed from the glacier, And
it's cold.
It's very cold. The only reason it's not freezing is because it's running very swiftly.
Right.
And
so is there snow around? I mean, it's what time of year is this?
It's in May.
So it's in May.
It's May, but this is up in the high country.
Okay.
So it's cold.
Right.
And anyway, so I'm swimming, trying to get out of the water, and it is so cold, James. My muscles are actually, they're contracting. They're just I couldn't. And when I got out finally and took off running, trying to run, I couldn't run. My legs wouldn't work. My muscles weren't working right. So I looked down the river. There goes my four-wheeler, and every once in a while it would go down in the water and back up. It would just disappear. And my gun was in a boot. It was on the side. It broke off. Then I saw my gun going down the river. I thought, oh man, I'm gonna lose everything. And
so you're on the other side of the river now. You actually crossed it.
No, I'm not over there yet.
Oh, okay.
The four-wheeler went down in the water, and I'm still on the wrong side of the river.
Okay.
So we're both on the wrong side of the river. The camp's on the other side.
I see.
So we've got to get across that river to get back to camp. And so my friend said, he said, the only way we're going to get out of this, I've got to try to get across the river because I can't get your four-wheeler, I can't get your gun, we can't get anything till and so he went way on down. I watched him, and 3 times I tried to get across that river on foot, and as soon as I'd get down about waist, that water was so swift it just washed me down. And then I'm thinking, why am I keep trying this? I mean, I'm freezing to death.
Right.
And my muscles wouldn't work. So I watched him way down the river. He finally found a place where there was a little island in the middle. He got to that and then just gunned it and barely got across. I mean, it had to be God that helped him get across. Otherwise, I wouldn't be telling you this story.
Right.
We were in trouble. When he got across, I thought, okay, now I've got some hope. So I made my way down that way, and on the way we got my four-wheeler out. It finally ended up on a sandbar and just turned upside down, I think, and he got his winch on it and pulled it out with his four-wheeler. And then by that time I had gotten down there, and he had also found my gun. He'd gone way down and was able to grab my gun as it went by. So, and the other thing is, it was actually this very coat that I had strapped on the four-wheeler, and I had my billfold in it, all my knives. I mean, it was just everything I needed was in that thing, and I'd only put one bungee strap on it, and so I figured it was gone. That thing had been flipping and carrying on, but when he pulled it up on the bank, it was hanging by the sleeve on that bungee strap, and everything was still in there.
Wow!
I could not believe it. It was
that's a miracle.
Yes, indeed. So anyway, I said, well, how am I going to get across? He said, the same way I got your four-wheeler. So he pulled that winch cable out and threw me the hook, and I grabbed a hold of it. By then my hands I wrapped it around my wrist because my fingers wouldn't work. They just wouldn't work. I was so cold. And so he pulled the winch cable in and also backed the four-wheeler up and pulled me across that river and got me on the other side. The problem is now we got 45 minutes that I have to ride on the back of that four-wheeler. He pulled me back to camp with my four-wheeler. But I'm sopping wet, freezing. I can't hardly feel anything. I just feel numb. And so I'm numb, and I'm thinking, how in the world am I going to last to get back to camp where I can get some, build a fire, get some help. And but just I could feel a little warmth off the exhaust on his four-wheeler. Just a little bit. Every once in a while it would hit me. It felt so good.
Wow.
But when we got back to camp,
not much warmth.
My fingers wouldn't work. I could hardly walk at all. I could just barely stumble around. And he had to help me get my wet clothes off. And I finally got some dry clothes on. And stood around the fire for 2 hours. We built a big fire. And that helped. But I got in a sleeping bag that night with poly P's on, wool socks, and slept for 12 hours. I was so exhausted from the whole incident. The next morning when I got up, my upper body was warm, my hands were warm, but my feet and legs were like blocks of ice. Still after all that time. And when we got back to camp, I was shivering uncontrollably, and I just felt like I was going to, you know, hypothermia was setting in big time.
Yeah.
But anyway, if he had not been with me, I'd never made it out of that one. And so a lot of times it pays to have a partner with you.
Yes. Yeah.
And he's the one that I told him, I thanked him many times. I said, you saved my life. I'd have never made it out of that by myself.
Yeah.
Had no way to start a fire. There was no kindling anywhere. There was no wood anywhere.
Right.
And so when we got back to camp, there was, of course, but where we were, there was nothing.
Yeah.
So it was, thank God for friends.
Yes, absolutely. That's really neat. Well, I appreciate that. And so you're going to finally tell us about this bear.
Yeah, let's talk about this bear. All right, this grizzly bear here, we were actually on a moose hunt floating down the Tanana River. It was a 70-mile float. There were 3 other guys with me. We were on a raft, and we weren't even thinking bear. We were trying to get moose. And so this was the second day on the float, and we had gone off on a little side river there. It was a little smaller than the Tanana, and looking for a place to camp for the night, and looked up on the side of the bank. There was a little grassy knoll, and I said, hey, there's some grass. We could put a tent up right there. And my son-in-law was with me. He went, bear! I hadn't even seen a bear, and this bear reared up on its back legs and barked just like a dog. Roar! And then it came down and running right for us. We're all 4 in the float, and we're trying to figure out what to do. Everybody's panicking. One guy had a plastic oar, and he's got it up. You know, this bear's coming at us wide open. Finally, realized the only gun that was out was my gun. It was a .338 high-powered rifle. The rest of them were under totes and sleeping bags and everything else in the raft. And so I grabbed my gun up, and she's still coming, and so I just reared up, and I couldn't find me in the scope, and just looked in the general direction and shot. And thank God she went down, because she was getting really close to us by then. And the guy on the front of the raft, he goes, hurry, shoot, I've read about this stuff. We knew we were in trouble. But she went down, and we waited quite a while before we went around and made sure she was dead, and put her in the raft, went on down the river about a mile, and then camped out. We had to stay in those woods that night. But anyway, and so I skinned her out with a pin light flashlight in my mouth, and that's the only thing we had, and so I put it in my mouth and do the skinning, and that's how we survived that evening. But anyway, another story. Right before we'd come around that bend, all 4 of us had gotten out of the raft and climbed up this bank to look in an open area to see if we could see moose. And when we got up there, I said, hey guys, anybody bring a gun? We all looked at each other. None of us had a gun. We got back in the raft, went around that loop, and that's where that bear was. If she'd been up there, and we'd had no way to defend ourselves. And so I think what we're trying to say is keep your weapons close, because you may need them quickly.
This is James Bender for Waypoint Survival. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Also, make sure and check out the links in the description box below. And while you're down there, make sure and check out our Teespring link, which is located just below the description box. There you'll find great Waypoint Survival merchandise, which goes to help support the channel and the ongoing research that we do to bring you great video content. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the channel. We'd really appreciate it. And if you do subscribe, make sure and press that bell button so that you can stay notified of all of our upcoming videos. And we'll talk to you next time.